Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome back, left side of the aisle. I'm your host, Larry Erickson, and for the next close to half hour, I'm going to be rattling away about things that I think are important enough for you to make note of. As always, if you have any reactions to the show, you can send me an email. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING, at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there. Just please, if you do send me email, include something in the subject line and make it clear it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer. But you will get an answer, that I promise. So let's get on with it. I've been away for a couple of weeks with storms and other problems, but we're back, so let's get to it. And I'm starting, as I always like to, with some good news. This is, remember Ebola? Remember the disease that was going to kill us all if we didn't close the borders right now and quarantine everybody who had ever even thought about being in Africa? Well, the last week of January, there were fewer than 100 new cases reported in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, which are the three countries most affected by the latest outbreak. That's the fewest number since June. The number actually ticked up a bit the week after that, but these numbers still represented a sharp drop from the peak around September, when there would be 700 new cases a week. More than 9,000 people have died in the current outbreak of Ebola, but it has now been contained and controlled enough to the point where the amazing Mr. O is withdrawing most of the 1,300 U.S. troops that went to the area to help deal with the outbreak. Only about 100 are going to remain behind as support for the civilian authorities that are continuing to work there. There is going to be continuing support for the roughly 10,000 or so medical professionals who are still dealing with the outbreak, but the U.S. military is being withdrawn. The military actually had built 10 Ebola treatment plants and helped build 4 more. So, congratulations to the military for that, because I was like, this is the kind of thing the military is really good at. If you need some kind of thing done on an emergency basis that has to be organized and done quickly and well put together, the military is good at that. They're very organized. So this is the kind of thing that the military actually is good for, and good on them for the work that they did. Another bit of good news on an issue that where there's been, again, a lot of good news this past year is same-sex marriage. Friday, January 23rd, federal district judge Callie Granada ruled that Alabama's ban on same-sex marriage violated both the equal protection and due process rules of the U.S. Constitution. She first refused to stay a ruling, but changed her mind 2 days later to issue a 14-day stay to allow for an appeal. On February 3rd, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals declined to extend that stay, and on February 9th, the U.S. Supreme Court did the same. So on February 9th, that stay expired, and Alabama became the 37th state with same-sex marriage. Now, a snag has arisen in Alabama in the form of Roy Moore. He's the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court there. He used a legal loophole which may or may not exist, depending upon who you ask. But he used a loophole to claim that since the district court order was addressed to the governor and the attorney general, and not specifically to the probate judges who actually issue marriage licenses, that the order, he said, did not apply to them. And in fact, he said he ordered those judges to refuse to issue those licenses, leaving those probate judges in the position of having to decide each on their own to follow the order of the person to whom they supposedly report, or to follow the order of the federal court. The result was a mixed bag. Only a minority of counties in Alabama actually issued marriage licenses. That first day, only 8 out of 67 counties, representing about 40% of the state's population, actually issued marriage licenses. The thing is, while this is doubtless heartbreaking for those who have already waited so long for the opportunity to marry, it's important to recognize that this is nothing more than a last-ditch attempt by the bigots to grasp onto a straw to enable them to continue their bigotry. In point of fact, a lot of people think that the Supreme Court gave the game away when it refused to stay the district court ruling. The biggest clue from that actually came from a dissent to that decision filed by Justice Clarabelle Thomas, joined by all-time scumbag Antonin Skeletor. Towards the end of his dissent, Thomas wrote that the court's decision to allow same-sex marriages to begin in Alabama, even as a case on that issue was before the Supreme Court, he said, quote, "This may well be seen as a signal of the court's intended resolution of that question," unquote, which many have taken as a very strong indication that Thomas believes or even knows that there are 5 votes in favor of same-sex marriage equality on the Supreme Court, and so that such bans will be struck down not only in Alabama but everywhere sometime this year. Otherwise, just as a quick sidebar, this guy Roy Moore, he's a right-wing reactionary jackass, but he's not stupid. He knows what he's doing is a losing cause. He has to know, he knows this is just a holding action. But he's also an elected official. Yes, he is. He's elected to his position there. And there's a lot of folks who figure he's just doing this because it'll look good during the next campaign, that he stood firm on this. And by the way, as a footnote to all of that, as another indication of the progress that is being made on this issue, at the recent right-wing self-congratulatory Vote for Me confab, the Iowa Freedom Forum, the formerly hot-button topic of same-sex marriage was barely mentioned, as it seems that the right wing was trying to forget that they ever brought it up. However, moving on from there to some not good news, I had to give you a couple of quick notes just to remind us how far we still have to go on the issue of LGBT rights. For one thing, 11 states have rules spelling out how teachers should address homosexuality if and when it comes up, rules which either specifically denigrate homosexuality or present heterosexuality as the only viable option. Meanwhile, Representative Chris Smith said during a hearing on January 27th before a House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, quote, "I am a strong believer in traditional marriage and do not construe homosexual rights as human rights." Apparently homosexuals aren't quite human. Smith's excuse for this is that he said there's no consensus in the U.S. or internationally about same-sex marriage as a human right, and he's only interested in universally recognized human rights for all. So only rights universally recognized work for him, which means so much for same-sex marriage, so much for bans on workplace discrimination against LGBT people, so much for women voting and other rights not internationally recognized across the world. You can make up your own list on that. Actually, it might also be interesting to look at the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document to which the U.S. is a signatory, and look at the human rights guaranteed in there and compare Chris Smith's voting record to the rights guaranteed under that document. Not another thing on this same front, there's a bill in Mississippi that would define anyone who is homosexual as an unfit parent who should not be allowed custody of a minor. There's also a bill in Oklahoma that is intended to hinder same-sex marriages by a very roundabout route. It would strip judges of the power to officiate at marriages and court clerks of the role in issuing marriage licenses, turning both those roles over to clergy, specifically, quoting, preacher, minister, priest, rabbi, or ecclesiastical dignitary. And those people, of course, would be free to grant or refuse to grant licenses based on their religious freedom. And even though, by the way, if you notice that list there, that would also seem to restrict marriage to Christians and Jews, too, but that wasn't really the point. And because what happens to those iced out who can't find a priest or a rabbi to marry them? Well, he said, you can file an affidavit for a common law marriage. The problem is the state of Oklahoma does not recognize common law marriage. Finally, and most significantly, because admittedly those laws, they're probably unlikely to actually pass, the most significant thing here, on February 10th, Kansas Governor Sam Brownback rescinded an executive order from 2007 that had offered labor protection, work protection for gay and bisexual state workers. In its place, Brownback said that he was reaffirming the state's commitment to employment practices that do not discriminate based on, quote, race, color, gender, religion, national origin, ancestry, or age. But apparently discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, those are just fine now. So if you're a state worker in Kansas who has been out sometime over the last several years under the previous order, you'd better hope you haven't had an argument with a vindictive administrator. Like I said, there's still a lot more to do. All right, and moving on from there, we've got two instances of what we here call the little thing. This is where something in a news report or an article, just a little thing that sort of gets passed over, but actually is important or revealing. We'll start with the fact that when Bill Bratton was chosen to be the police commissioner for the city of New York, I was upset enough about that to call it the outrage of the week. Well, here's a good reason why. He announced at the end of January that the NYPD is establishing a new anti-terror strike force, 350 cops specially trained in high-tech weaponry and who will be equipped in ways that regular cops aren't, including extra heavy protective gear, long rifles, and machine guns. The unit will be dedicated to disorder control to deal with protests, lone wolf attacks, and evolving threats posed by terrorists. Back up a section. Protests? Yes, he meant protest. In fact, the unit with extra heavy protective gear, long rifles, and machine guns, yeah, he said he specifically included, Bratton did, dealing with, quote, events like our recent protests as part of the unit's job. So apparently events like Occupy Wall Street and the entirely peaceful protests about Ferguson and the Eric Garner verdicts are now going to be dealt with by an elite force of cops with heavy protective gear, long rifles, and machine guns. More and more when these people say we're only doing it to protect you, I really wonder who is the you that they are talking to. The other little thing here, a couple of weeks ago, I gave the good news that a revolt led by Elizabeth Warren had succeeded in blocking the nomination of Antonia Weiss to a spot at the Treasury Department. Well, in a rundown on the politics of the thing, Politico.com said this, quoting, "It was not a total victory. Weiss will still join Treasury as an unconfirmed counselor to Secretary Jack Lew, but in terms of symbolism, the Washington power game and the ideological direction of the Democratic Party, Warren won big. And the moderate Wall Street and business-friendly wing of the party, in past years happily occupied by Democratic presidential nominee-in-waiting Hillary Clinton, got punched in the mouth." Okay, did you catch it? The Wall Street and business-friendly wing of the Democrats is defined as the moderates. Being friendly to Wall Street is the sign of moderation. So being for consumers, to be for workers, to actually be for the little guy that everybody's claiming to be for, that makes you some kind of radical. In fact, let me tell you about these moderates, these Wall Street-friendly moderates. The 2010 Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act included a provision called the push-out rule. That rule says essentially that if banks and other financial institutions want to engage in risky trading in derivatives, they have to do it through a separate non-bank affiliate that would not be insured by the FDIC and would not be likely to get any kind of future bailout. Now, naturally, the big banks, especially the big five, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, they hate this because they control 90% of the derivatives market. And they want to continue, again, to be able to gamble with our tax money so that they can, again, be bailed out when the thing blows up in their face, again. Well, the continuing resolution that lame duck Congress passed in December to keep the government funded not only included a provision that eviscerates the push-out rule, it did so in language that was written by a Citigroup lobbyist. And if you don't believe me, look at this. This is a side-by-side comparison. On the left, your left, that is the text as proposed for this legislation by Citigroup. On the right is the actual text of the legislation as passed. The parts that are highlighted in color, they are identical word for word. An attempt was made to remove this provision in the Senate, but it failed because these moderate Democrats weren't willing to challenge their big donors on Wall Street. These people, these moderates of the Democratic Party, they are not on your side. And when they tell you they are lying to you. Let's take a break. And here we are back. Here we are back again. In fact, we're coming back from break with one of our regular weekly features. It's the Outrage of the Week. The Outrage of the Week this week points to something that I've been considering actually for some time. About 6 years ago, I began collecting what I called the rules, or more completely, the right-wing rules for avoiding debate. The last time I updated them, about 4 years ago this was, there were 17 such rules, ranging from deny, 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 and attack, 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 which were rules 1 and 2, respectively, to such as seize control of the clock of history, insist all events outside the time frame most advantageous to your argument are irrelevant and must not be considered. That was Rule 15. It started out as a rather lighthearted undertaking, just kind of poking fun at people, at evasions and foolishness, but over time it became more serious. It actually became an indictment of the efforts of the right wing to avoid actual factual engagement on issues and to substitute accusation and obfuscation for investigation. The list, ultimately, I said, is about deceit, it's about intellectual cowardice, it's about being a bully, it's about being a liar, it's about being an American right-winger. Well, I mention all that because now it's high time for rule number 18, which is, when the rules of the game you are playing do not guarantee you a win, demand the rules be changed. That was on full display as the new Congress opened. On the very first day of the new Congress, House Goppers introduced a rules package for the year that included a provision that said it would be out of order for Congress to reduce the actuarial balance of the Social Security retirement account. Now, what that means, I mean, it sounds like, kind of so what, but what it means in practice is that money cannot be shifted from one Social Security account, which is the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which is what we usually think of when we think of Social Security, to what is in fact another Social Security account, the Disability Insurance Fund. But the funds about disability insurance have to be replenished, or recipients who are among the most vulnerable in our society, it had to be replenished, or those recipients could see a 20% cut in their benefits by the end of 2016. Now, the normal way to do that, to replenish it, would be simply to shift the tax money coming in to Social Security a little more to disability insurance, and a little bit less to the others, to the Old Age Survivors Fund. This has been done 11 times before, sometimes going one way, sometimes going the other, depending upon which of those funds needed the extra little kick right at that moment. This has been uncontroversial, it has been routine, it's simply an accounting practice. But for now, that has become impossible, because with this rule, such reallocation of taxes becomes impossible. Because obviously, there is no way to reduce the amount of tax money coming in to the Old Age Survivors Trust Fund that does not reduce the actuarial balance of that fund. And the thing is, this is the real thing. This is no sudden crisis. This is no failure of disability insurance. And the right-wing claim that in recent years, disability insurance has become a sort of substitute welfare, I mean, that's a flaming lie. Because the thing is, it's been known, this has been known for years, since 1994. It has been predicted, expected, it has been known that disability insurance fund would need to be replenished around 2016. This has been expected, it's been known, but now it's going to be blocked because the right wing, which has been trying to destroy Social Security since it was first instituted and still failing at that, is now changing the rules in an attempt to undermine the smaller target of disability insurance while squawking and quacking that this is all about protecting seniors, the same seniors whose benefits they have spent decades trying to strip away. It's an outrage. Right from there, an episode of what we call here Everything You Need to Know. And this is where you can learn a great deal about something in a very, very short time. In this case, it's everything you need to know about taking the powerful to account for their actions in just one tweet. It comes from Ian Millhiser of Think Progress, and it says, breaking, Brian Williams becomes the first person in human history to suffer professional consequences for lying about the Iraq War. And that is everything you need to know. Now, something I'm going to do pretty quickly here, make sure that I get it in. It's net neutrality. Now, people hear net neutrality and their brains go to sleep. People make it so complicated. It actually isn't. It's actually very simple. It's just a baseline principle. The baseline principle that all data going across the internet is treated equally. No traffic can get special treatment over any other traffic. This is how the internet has grown and flourished based on this democratic, if you will, democratic principle that all information gets treated the same. Now, the telecoms, they hate this because what they want to do is to be able to charge websites extra money in order to guarantee them faster access over other sites that wind up not being able to do it because they can't fork over the big bucks that the telecoms want for this. Well, the FCC, after a lot of dispute, a lot of argument, the FCC has now agreed to vote on regulating the internet under Title II of the Telecommunications Act. What that means is the internet and the ISPs and the telecoms, they would be regarded here as a common carrier, which means it would be like your telephone service. In that, just like no telephone call can automatically go through faster than some other telephone call. No telephone call can get automatic preference over a different telephone call. So no information going over the internet can get automatic preference over another. There would be no fast lanes and slow lanes on the internet. This vote is scheduled for February 26th. You might want to give your congressional representatives a call or an email or whatever to urge them to publicly support a free and open internet by supporting true net neutrality. All right, now going to our other regular weekly feature, it's the Clown Award, given as always for an act of meritorious stupidity. This week, the Clown Award goes to the administration of Kermit Elementary School of Kermit, Texas. A 9-year-old student there named Aiden Stewart had recently seen the movie The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies with his family. By the way, I got to tell you, I haven't seen The Five Armies, but I've seen Desolation of Smaug and An Unexpected Journey, and the original trilogy, the Ring trilogy, is a whole lot better. Anyway, Aiden Stewart came to school with this big blue ring that he said was the one true ring forged in Mount Doom. He told a classmate he could make that classmate turn invisible if he put the ring on his head. The school called this a terroristic threat and suspended him. The principal, one Roxanne Greer, said threats, real or imagined, to another child's safety would not be tolerated. So even now, even imaginary threats are terroristic, even when they're not actually threats. Just remember that putting the ring on would turn you invisible, but all you had to do to be visible was take it off again. Greer refused to comment on the suspension, citing student confidentiality. So, oh yeah, the suspension is not confidential. The reference to it as a threat to another child's safety is not confidential, but the logic by which that actually was a threat, oh no, that's confidential. What I want to know is, when did we become such a frightened people? When did be afraid, be very afraid become our national motto? I mean, I know about 9/11, the rest, but this predates that. This predates that. 9/11 just took advantage of it. The 9/11 attitude just took advantage of it to make us even more afraid. But this predates that. I mean, especially with children. Now, the fear dealing with children and about children is becoming incredible. A couple of examples. There's a woman in Chicago who has been charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor for leaving her 4-year-old safely locked in the car, playing with his iPad, literally for 4 minutes. Literally. A couple in Maryland are being investigated by local child services with the possibility of having their children taken away from them for alleged neglect, because they let the 10-year-old boy and the 6-year-old daughter walk together a mile from a local park back home. A mother in South Carolina was charged with unlawful conduct toward a child for leaving her 9-year-old daughter alone to play in a park with about 40 other kids around. A man in Ohio has been charged with child endangerment because, unbeknownst to him, his son skipped church to go play with friends. It's incredible. I know that a lot of people at my age could come up with their own stories. All right? I remember when I was growing up, I was, 8. I was about 8. My brother was about 10. Okay? And we walked a mile to the bus stop, took the bus into town in order to walk to the train station, to take the train station down to another town, to walk a mile to my grandmother's house where my parents picked us up after dinner. I shudder to think how many years in prison my parents would have spent if that was done today. When did we become such a terrified people? But getting back directly to our clowns, I have to tell you, they did more than this one thing to justify the dishonor this week. They didn't simply just wet their administrative pants over a child's fantasy. The Stewart family had actually moved to the school district about 6 months ago, and Aiden has already been suspended 3 times. The first was for referring to a fellow student as black. The other was for bringing to school his favorite book. It's called The Big Book of Knowledge. This is a popular children's encyclopedia. But the teacher discovered that within it there was a section on pregnancy that showed a diagram of a pregnant woman, and that was enough to get him suspended. The administration of the Kermit School District of Kermit, Texas is clearly a bunch of clowns. All right, I got about 1 minute left. I'm just going to do this very quickly. One of the things about doing the show is that I'm always afraid that something will happen just before I do the show, so I don't have enough time to talk about it. Barack Obama has presented to Congress his proposal for his war powers to deal with ISIS. I do not have enough time to talk about it this week, but I definitely am going to be talking about that next week. So right now, for the moment, we're going to take our leave. You have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week. Peace.